Hello and welcome to our next live Q&A here with Emily Beynon, Principal Flute of the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, founder of Lefreque, the Netherlands Flute Academy, and international soloist. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Lovely to see you, Camilla.
You too. Today we've got a joint broadcast on Emily's YouTube channel and on our Principal Chair's Facebook page. So hopefully that's going out on both platforms at the moment. If you do have any questions, anyone who's watching, please comment below the videos and we'll be able to see those for Emily to answer those live. But first of all, we have some questions that people have sent in advance. So let's get straight in with a question from Jonathan. And his question is, how did you find it moving from the UK to the Dutch music scene? And were there many differences? And is there anything you'd like to take back to the UK industry?
Goodness, well, it's a very long time ago now. I've just celebrated 25 years in the orchestra, so let's see if I can remember back that far. I think that there's a way of describing Dutch people as being very direct in what they say, and I think that was probably the first thing that I really noticed in a rehearsal context, even in the first rehearsal, is that people were very much more direct. It's all done very politely and with a huge amount of respect to one another, but there's no beating about the bush. If someone thinks your F sharp is too sharp, then they'll just say it, and it doesn't mean that they like you any less or that you won't get a Christmas card, but they're very direct, and that just, it's when it's done politely and with respect, I think you just save so much time in rehearsal, working in that sort of way. So there was a very, when I joined the woodwind section of the Concertgebouw Orchestra, a lot of the players around me had been playing together for 20 and 30 years. So it was a very well-oiled machine, and there was a wonderful sense of camaraderie and understanding of one another's playing, and so that was it was hugely daunting in a sense, because I had cassettes full of Netherlands wind ensemble recordings from which I'd heard from the radio as I was in secondary school, and then suddenly I was sitting there in their midst, as because it was the old Netherlands Blazers Ensemble, the Netherlands Wind Ensemble, used to be formed out of members of the Concertgebouw. So it was hugely daunting to have these musical personalities around me, but they were so comfortable and so knew one another so well that it was very easy to fit in with that. Regarding what I would like to take to the back to the British system, I suppose that directness is, as I said, it's an awful lot of time when it's done, with love and with respect. I think it can be wonderful. So yes, if it was one thing, then I would probably say that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Our next question is from Annika, and she says, I'm a Swedish professional flute player working permanently in an orchestra for 20 years. What is your best advice regarding routines to stay in tip-top shape during a lot of orchestral work and other things in life taking too much time from those important hours of practice?
Oh, golly. Yes. Well, I have a little, I have a warm-up of about 10 minutes. I can stretch it to 15 or 20 minutes or squash it into 5 minutes if needs must. Just involving lots of harmonics and whistle tones and long notes. And I just make sure that I have that, I do that as a very minimum. I might, if I've got I might have a morning of orchestra rehearsals and then maybe a chamber music rehearsal in the afternoon or some teaching. And just to have that minimum of 10 or 15 minutes to myself and with my airstream, if you like, and how that's fitting into the flute. I think that having that little safety bubble of 15 minutes helps me get through, the busiest days. Yeah.
Are there any of those harmonic exercises and things that you mentioned? Are there any that people could follow from any books or anything, or are they all have you made them all up over the years?
They're all nicked from other people's books. Trevor Wise' book on tone was the first book that I came across using those. Peter Lucas Graf does a few good exercise on harmonics in his book Checkup. Those are the two that spring to mind. People can go to my YouTube channel, of course, and I think right at the beginning of lockdown, I think I made a little video on harmonics. So those are all my favorite harmonics exercises. But I just think it's such a great exercise for really getting those different air speeds for the different registers.
Yeah.
I think that's the most crucial element of flute playing, really. And it affects your sound, and it affects your stability and control in all sorts of ways. Yeah.
We have a live question now from Jacob, and he says, "Hello, Emily. How long does it take you to be prepared to play in front of people or being ready to play in an orchestra?"
Oh,
so maybe how long does it take to prepare your parts for a concert?
Yeah. Well, when I'm ready, I'll let you know. In a way, you never feel that you've had enough time to practice, and you could always do with an extra hour or an extra week. Or, but I did, for example, I'm a member of a collective of musicians here in Amsterdam called Splendor, and we're running a series of live streams at the moment on Friday evenings, and the subtitle is Duo for a Day. And I did one last Friday where I met a jazz drummer at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that evening we have to play a live stream concert. And luckily he's very good at improvising, and it's extremely flexible. Thank you, Felix. And we had a great time. So, you can put together something quite quickly. But in all seriousness, in a general orchestra sort of schedule, when we have a normal orchestral schedule, and we might come onto that at some point in this conversation, I suppose. I usually try and start working on my parts about 3 weeks before, and that will obviously be a moving. So 3 weeks before, I'll do the nuts and bolts. I'll listen to it. I'll make sure that I can get through my notes, and then 2 weeks before, I'll just be sort of polishing that up, maybe increasing the tempo or those sort of things. And then a week before, just I know where exactly the trickiest spots are, so that by the time I get to my first rehearsal, I'm focused on what other people are doing and not what I'm doing. So that's an ideal version. I'm not going to pretend that every week I've been prepared for 3 weeks, but and it depends, of course, on the repertoire. Because with some contemporary pieces, they might need a lot more than 3 weeks to get them in your fingers, but the parts might not come in until much closer to the concert time. So, and then when it's a symphony that I've played a lot, then I know I don't need to listen to it, or I know exactly already where all the corners are. So it's how long is a piece of string sort of question. You can put together a concert in a day, and you can, with 4 or 5 weeks, still not have enough time. So,
yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Jacob, for that question. We have another live question now from Leonardo, and he asks, "Could you talk about resonance and how do you use it or work with it?"
Oh, resonance. Well, I suppose that. What do we mean by resonance? I think is probably a good starting point for answering that question. I think the most important thing to consider is how your body is going to be resonating with your sound. I think we all know the example of one flute player sounding pretty similar, playing 10 different flutes, whereas 10 different flute players sound quite different playing the same flute. So that is just a small example of how the resonance that we produce as a flute player is so dependent on your resonance as a person. So I do suggest to everyone that they sing a lot, whether that's just in the shower, or I do quite a lot of singing on my bike as I'm cycling around Amsterdam. I think it's really important to hear how your voice sounds. One of the first things that I often work on with students the first time I work with them is to check that their posture is as relaxed as can be. Because if there's any sort of tension in the throat, in the shoulders, in the way that they're standing, that will all impact on resonance. So I like to do, in the morning, I like to start off with some basic breathing exercises, and then just letting that airstream touch the flute as relaxed as a way as possible, and just to see what my sound is sounding like today. And that will vary slightly from day to day. Oh, today's a good sound day, today's a less good sound day. And quite often I can correct that actually just by making sure that my body is functioning as optimally as possible. But I'm not sure that that's what Leonardo really means. Maybe he means more in terms of the sound.
He has sent another message, and he says body resonance and flute resonance. So I think he said that that already.
I like to. I was once told a wonderful exercise about how when they discover an old Stradivarius or something, an old violin that hasn't been played for maybe 100 years or 200 years, the way that they sort of wake up the sound is to start up on the open G string, then go up to G sharp, and just start with a very slow, very exaggerated vibrato, and increasing it to get that part of the violin resonating, and then moving up to A and starting with a very slow vibrato, and just to get that note sort of ringing and singing inside the instrument. And it was a lovely story that, I must have been told that story 20, 30 years ago even. And I do, if I haven't been playing for a few days or something, or if I'm in a new surroundings and I want to see how that sounds, I will do an exercise like that, just starting with a very free air stream and just gradually warming up the vibrato and increasing the sort of singing quality of it. So that it's always coming from something within the airstream and within your body, and with as little restriction as you can manage. Yeah. I hope that answers Leonardo's question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Leonardo. And we have another live question from Richard, and he asks, what do you do when you're burnt out from practicing?
Burnt out from practicing. I think, to be honest, these days it's quite difficult to have enough time to be able to get burnt out practicing. So I sort of think, oh gosh, that must be a nice feeling. But I think it's really important when you're practicing to break it down into small chunks. So even if I've got a whole free day to practice, then I won't even try and do more than 4 hours, maybe 5 if I've got a really tough deadline that I'm trying to learn a new piece for a certain deadline or something. But so I break my practice down into either 3/4 of an hour or an hour block, and then inside that I never play for longer than 15 minutes without having a good 2 or 3 minutes just to sort of stretch, put the flute down and jump up and down, or do some stretches. This part of our body, the shoulders and upper chest, can get quite tense. So doing lots of things to free this part of your body. And the other thing that I do, aside from breaking it down to small blocks, is to make sure that you change subject, if you like, or change piece or topic quite regularly. So in an hour's practicing block, I will have inside that 4 sections, but probably only 2 pieces. And when I'm talking about 2 pieces, I might be just working at half a page of something. And in that way, I don't think I ever feel sort of burnt out from practicing. Yeah. I quite often feel as if I don't want to start practicing, but there's maybe another hurdle. Sometimes I sort of, I have to negotiate with myself that, well, if I just do that, then, and then once I'm started, then the hours seem to fly by. But
yeah,
I think break it down into small, manageable chunks is
Thank you for that, Richard. We have another live one. How do you make your sound unique, but know that you're not doing anything wrong?
Oh, what a tricky question. Well, I think that's quite similar to, in a way, my answer would be quite similar to the one about resonance. It's just thinking about how your voice sounds, because we are all, we've got a unique voice before that air even touches the instrument. So so lots of singing and not doing anything wrong. Yes. Well, I think that your ears should always be telling you whether it's a good idea to be doing what you're doing or not, and your body will tell you if you're in an awkward position or not. So if you have any pain, then stop, because it means that something's not right, and just keep listening like crazy. And I mean listening for inspiration to how you want to sound. So listening to, of course, to other flute players, to singers, to violinists, but also to birds. How do you, how is their sound? And so from nature we can learn a lot about sound too. But it's to do with appreciating your own voice, I think, and using that, allowing it to come out of your body. So stop if there's any pain, and always be listening.
Brilliant. And a question from Clara now. What are the most common playing mistakes that you see in young flute players?
Gosh, I think what would be, I think I touched on it already about posture. I think that because young bodies are very flexible and very, very tolerant, you can actually have quite a horrible position where you're with a lot of tension and it not to actually bother you when you're young, and then, as you get older, that your body will protest more and more. So now I really can't get away with any bad posture because my body will protest immediately. So I think posture is the first thing to correct, or to correct. The first thing that I often notice is a mistake, is how she formulated it. Another thing would be perhaps to not explore enough of the world of color in the flute. When we find a flute that we feel is our voice, our instrument, that is like a door to 1,000 possibilities in terms of sound. So, and sometimes a good sound is a bad sound in a way. Don't worry about there being air in the sound. Sometimes that's exactly the sort of quality that a phrase would need. And I think particularly in the low register, I think we're all slightly tempted to always use this very dark sound in the low register, and it can be wonderful to use that, and it's fantastic to have that. But if that's one of your colors in the palette in the low register, I think your music, your playing will become much more expressive.
We have another question from Clara, actually. She asks also, do you have any tips for developing a steady feel of pulse?
Oh, that's a good one. Dance. Literally, have a feel. Don't be afraid to move your body when you're playing. And I think that, you know, sometimes if you're really trying to get into a groove, sort of marching around your practice room or having some sort of rhythmic motion can maybe help. I think it's something, but maybe I mean more about dancing, sort of like putting on some music and dancing to that and getting used to how it feels to experience a beat in your body. And then you'll be able to take that sort of feeling into the practice room. And of course, I do lots and lots and lots of practice with a metronome, and I very often practice with syncopations and having one beat in a bar on maybe the third beat in the bar or something, which means that your first beat and third beat in 4/4 would have to be that much more stable. Play with other people, I think, is a really important way of discovering that you have a tendency to rush the fast notes or drag the slow notes or whatever it happens to be. So if you've got, I mean, it's a little bit difficult now in Corona times, but if you have the opportunity to play with other people, that is a really good measure of how steady you are. But maybe more important than being steady is that any rubato that you make has got a sort of logic to it. And if you're playing with other people, if they can follow any freedom that you're enjoying in the music, that's a good sign. And if you can't, then it's a bad sign, obviously.
Yeah. Let's have another question that we've had in advance now. We had one from Julio, who says he's one of Emily's many Brazilian fans. And he says, I recently joined as principal flute in a professional orchestra. What, in your experience, are the most valuable personal skills I should develop in order to give me the best chance of a very satisfying orchestral career?
Oh, what a brilliant question. Personal skills. It's funny, in my orchestra contract as a principal player, I'm actually responsible for the, well, I can't remember how it's exactly phrased, but the sort of the happiness and well-being of the flute section. Thankfully, my wonderful colleague Kirsten McCall is also principal flute. We have two principal flutes, and so we share this responsibility. And then even better is that we have a lovely, lovely flute section, and so it's absolutely no problem at all to keep the harmony within the group. And when we're on tour, we often go out and eat together, or, you know, if we have time to do a bit of sightseeing, then we'll end up together. So I think that team building is really important. Getting to know your colleagues. So, of course, in a musical sense, which you're doing in every rehearsal, in every concert, but getting to know them as people is really important. Whether that's you know, having a regular section dinner at your house, or, you know, I don't know, going bowling, the oboes against the flutes, or the, you know, whatever it happens to be. I think those kind of things, building up a really strong sense of friendship before the music can always help. It will help you solve any musical problems further down the road as well, and it'll help you to understand one another when you're playing a phrase together, and you'll understand how you can communicate. If it's not quite working, you'll be able to express what's not quite working and what you'd like to change much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, do invest time in getting to know your colleagues in your orchestra. Congratulations, by the way, on your job.
Yeah. And now another live question from Leonard, and he asks, what are your tips on further developing good tone?
Good tone. Making sure that you spend some time every day practicing the most straightforward exercise, which is just playing long notes and just listening to them. And I think it's Trevor Wine, his book, that says that when you start practicing tone, you'll think after a week or two that your tone's got worse. It hasn't. It's just that your listening has got better. So I think that ears are extremely important, and just devoting, if you feel that's not your strongest, the strongest part of your playing, then making sure that you devote a certain amount of time at the beginning of each practice session to doing really some fundamental back to basics sort of simple exercises. I mean, I may be repeating myself, but harmonics and whistle tones are really, really important, as are posture and having good breathing. And so it all ties together. You can't have a good sound if you have a sort of very tense posture. If your breathing's not good, you'll never get a good tone. So I think, that's answered the question somewhat, Leonard.
Yes. And a question from Lee. Did you ever look into improvisation or jazz?
Oh, I find it so difficult. I love listening to jazz, but for me, the magic is for a large part the fact that it's a musical world that I find very moving, and I love the fact that it's emotional, like the music that I play. But I know nothing about how it is created. I find it a mystery, and I love the mystery. I'm terrified of the idea of improvisation. I was talking about the concert that I did last Friday with Felix in Splendor in Amsterdam. And Splendor is, Felix is a jazz drummer, and he does nothing but improvise. And that was quite a clash of two quite different worlds. And I don't know who was more terrified to join the other one's world, to be honest. So I love listening to improvised music. I am so filled with admiration for people who can do that. I love jazz, and I think I'll leave it to the experts.
Yeah. Live question from Sunny now. While I'm playing long notes and try to make it musical with vibrato, I often get carried away and forget to count, e.g. in the start of Debussy Afternoon of the Faun. Any tips, please?
Hi, Sunny. Thanks for a great question. I have the same problem, actually, because sometimes when we're playing a slow tune and we're so absorbed by, is that the most beautiful sound? Is my vibrato shimmering? Is there enough direction? And it is easy to lose count. And I think the key is not to think about counting, but to feel a pulse. So maybe that's connected to Kira's question about feeling improving the sense of rhythm, that maybe what we need to do is increase our sense of pulse, even when we're playing slow music, because it tends to be those slow tunes where we want to get our best sound out of the cupboard, and that means that sometimes we forget to count quite as accurately as we might. But if we've got the pulse going, so the beginning of l'après-midi, which Sunny asked about, I would absolutely think that in a slow 3 rather than in a fast 9. And I would feel those 3 pulses in a bar rather than counting, how many beats or the long notes are. So I think that would be my tip for that. But I completely understand the problem.
Thank you, Sunny. And another question that we had sent in advance now from Beth. Please, can you suggest 3 books that you think all flute players or musicians should read?
Well, I should start with quants, shouldn't I? And I'll confess something a bit naughty. I've had the quants book for forever. And as a student, we were all meant to read it, and I didn't quite get around to it. And at some point, I decided it would make really, because some of the chapters are so small, it would make really good reading for in the toilet. So it's for many years, quants was next to my loo for those few minutes a day, which is probably sacrilege. But so of course, quants. Every flute player should read that, and every musician who plays should read that. The Art of Flute Playing. 2 books that I love, which are a bit more up to date. Geoffrey Gilbert, The Gilbert Legacy by Angelita Floyd is, I think, an excellent book. It's a lot of history about there's a sort of, the beginning part of it is a biography about, such an important figure in British flute playing, in British musical life, in the world. But then there are lots of excellent exercises and analyses of where things could go wrong with students. And she when she was preparing the book, she basically sat in on all his lessons for 2 years and made notes, and then collected them in these very helpful chapters. So I think that that is absolutely, The Gilbert Legacy by Angelita Floyd would be absolutely up there for me. And another book which I think is very interesting and often very witty and extremely knowledgeable and interesting as a flute player is Michel Debost's book, The Simple Flute. Mm-hmm. I love. So if we exclude quants, because of course quants, that goes without saying. So I would add 1 book, and that would be from Nicholas Harnoncourt, The Musical Dialogue. Mm-hmm. And when I joined the Concertgebouw Orchestra, I was lucky enough to do lots of projects with him. Unfortunately, when he came to conduct in Amsterdam, he always spoke German. I worked with him a couple of times in the Chamber Orchestra of Europe when he spoke English, so I know he could speak English very well. But he always spoke German when he was here, which was a bit of a pity because my German is not very good at all. But I learned a lot from the detail with which he marked the parts, but also from his books, which are excellent. And my favorite is The Musical Dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I haven't read that yet, actually. So
that's brilliant.
I will be reading that soon. Something to do with lockdown. Another question from Lee. He asks, how do you decide on a flute upgrade without getting ripped off? I'm looking at an instrument of an intermediate grade flute.
Okay. Well, I'm not really an expert on this. I would say if you can get to a flute shop, then do just plan a day and go and try everything that is available. I'm not sure how Corona regulations work in flute shops these days, but I'm sure that they've thought of something. So just try all sorts of different combinations. You might find that improving the head joints might help. I would always suggest an open hold flute, as if you're not playing an open hold flute yet, then I would definitely suggest open hold flute. I think that was the week that I switched from a closed hold to an open hold flute was the week that I improved my technique beyond all recognition without having to do any more work. That is, just having to have the right position meant that my fingers moved much better. And it also gives you so many more possibilities for sort of colouring the sound and for intonation things as well. But I would just plan an afternoon or a day in a music shop, and you'll get a feeling of whether you can trust them or not. I don't know where you are, Lee, but if you can get to a flute shop, that would be the way to go, and just see what speaks to you. Don't forget second-hand flutes, because quite often you can get a good bargain. Just the fact that someone else has played on it for a few years might even be an advantage, and most flute shops will have serviced it and give some kind of guarantee on a second-hand instrument as well.
Yeah. We have another live question now, saying, do you consider auditions behind a screen better than without a screen? And could you describe the ideal audition scenario?
Hi, Joao. Yes, I love having a screen for the first. In our orchestra, we have a screen for the first 2 rounds, and then the final is open. And I love that I'm not able to be distracted by, whether it's someone wearing something weird or have a weird gesture as they're playing or something, or have the music stand placed in an odd position. So I love that none of that can influence my listening. And I remember when I was doing auditions, the first time I did an audition behind a screen was when I came to the Concertgebouw, and I know a lot of people find it off-putting, but I actually found it quite liberating, because I could just focus on the sound. And I'm similarly, as a player, then you're not distracted by, oh, what's he writing down, or oh, she doesn't look as if she's enjoying it very much, or oh, I think he's fallen asleep. You can just focus on the sound of the music. So I am a very strong believer in having curtains in at least the preliminary stages of orchestral auditions.
So would that be your ideal audition scenario then?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Another question now that was sent in advance by Ron, and he says, I've noticed on your YouTube channel that you've added a sort of thumb support to your right hand on your flute. Can you tell us about that, please? Yes,
that's called a thumb port. That's my thumb port. I've got the yellow and grey one, which is for gold flutes. And the idea of the thumb port is designed by a very clever chap called Ho-Fan Lee, who is a friend of mine. And he sent me this, I think it must be about 15 years ago now. He wrote me an email and said, Emily, can I send you something in the post? I'm really interested to see what your thoughts are. And I said, okay, yeah, sure. And this package arrived, and I put it on my flute, and I instantly felt that any tension in the top of my hand was so much less present. The whole idea is, because the flute, I don't know if I can show you, the flute wants to roll back into your hand because of the mechanism. And what the thumb port does is that it stops that rotation, because without it, you're, as well as having to go up and down, you're also constantly having to turn against the pull of gravity that the flute wants to do into your hand. So I find it absolutely invaluable, and if anyone, that's where I place it on my flute. So it's high up. Oh, where am I here? Yeah, as high up the tube as possible and as close to this as possible, making sure it doesn't get in the way of that, because that can be very embarrassing. I like the stability that gives my thumb, and then I can be completely free, particularly in the little finger. There's another design as well, which is slightly lower, if that suits you a bit better. It's not for everyone. I know people who don't like using it, or who find it doesn't help. I've even had some people say that it affects their sound they feel as if it doesn't resonate in the same way. In my experience of working with students and professionals, actually what it does is stabilize the sound. Because the flute's not constantly moving around here, I find that it helps people to actually produce a better sound. So I wouldn't live without it now. So, yeah, that's what that is.
Yeah. We have a question from Dr. George Becker. Do you know the flautist Paul Meisner?
Yes.
He was saying, could you say some words about Paul Meisner, who died a few weeks ago, and his art of flute playing, especially Bach?
Oh my goodness, I hadn't heard that he died actually. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. He was, I don't know him actually as a player. I met him a few times. He was a teacher of Anna Gazzuli and Andrea Liebknecht, if I'm not mistaken. And he taught in Munich in the Hochschule for many years. And then I think he moved to Tokyo and was teaching in Tokyo for the last, I don't know, the last years. And I always find him a very kind man when I met him. And I know that he was a very, very good teacher. But I didn't know him terribly well, and sadly I don't know his playing. So, yes, gosh, sad news.
Yeah. Thank you for that, for letting us know about that, George. We have another question from Leonard. He asks, what are your thoughts on the Lefreque? I see you play with one. Would you recommend them?
Yes, well, the Lefreque, this is a Lefreque, for anyone who, well, this is very confusing, isn't it, this mirror image? A Lefreque is essentially, it's two plates of metal which are held on the flute and are an acoustic bridge between the head joint and the body. Again, I find it wonderful. It's a Dutch saxophone player who developed it, and he showed me quite an early prototype, and I was completely sold. I thought it made a big difference to my playing on my flute. Funnily enough, I don't play it on my wooden flute. I don't use a Lefreque on my wooden flute. So it may be on different for different people, maybe on different instruments it works better or is less effective. But I would certainly give it a try because I found it wonderful for keeping a sort of homogeneity in the sound and improving legato. So I would certainly recommend trying one. Yes.
Yeah. A question we had in advance from Millie. She says, do you have any new CDs coming out soon that we should keep an eye out for?
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking that. My lovely pianist Andrew West and I have just started this summer on an exciting project called Project Paloma. And we are, across 5 years, we're going to be recording one CD a year of the Second World War masterpieces. So this year we recorded the Frank Martin Ballade, the Hindemith Sonata, the Blacher Sonata, and the Karl Frühling. Now, it's a little bit before the Second World War. It's written in 1929. But actually, the reason that his music is unknown and that he's relatively unknown these days is very much connected to the political climate during the Second World War, which is why I felt it justified to including it in that first CD. And that's German, Austrian, Swiss theme. The next CD, which we'll be recording next summer, will be Prokofiev Sonata and Weinberg miniatures. And the year after that, we're going to do a French CD with Duthier, Sancan, Chandelinos. The year after that, Dutch, and finishing with British and American. And I've been a bit cheeky, and I've included the Martinu Sonata because he wrote it when he was in America. So he wasn't American. This sort of, so it's basically stemmed from the fact that I noticed that so many of our masterpieces, Chandelinos, Hindemith Sonata, Martinu Sonata, Sancan, were all written in these the years during the Second World War, the years of the Second World War, and I saw it as being perhaps that composers were searching for this innocence that the flute so often represents. And so, yeah, the programs, every concert we are going to prepare, we're going to perform with a writer or a poet or some form of written word that was written at the same time or is about the Second World War from a poet or writer from that country. Mm-hmm. So I had a wonderful musicologist, historian do the concert last year, Rolf Sommann, who was born in Berlin and taught Dutch and German here in the Netherlands, and he chose some fantastic texts. So there's a website where all the programs and all the CD information will come out. It was meant to be, we were meant to be launching the first CD in December, and that's been COVID cancelled, or I should say COVID postponed. We're hoping to launch it now in March.
Okay.
Yeah, for Zephyr Records.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
We'll look out for those then. A question from Carolina now. Do you have any tricks for yourself to keep the energy and freshness of a live concert whilst recording in a studio or at home?
Hi, Carolina. Gosh, it's funny doing these, making the YouTube videos. I noticed that when I'm sort of putting on my makeup and doing my hair and deciding what I'm going to wear, and I get sort of slightly nervous, even though the process is so completely different. Mm-hmm. That for me, that whole ritual of sort of getting myself dressed up, maybe because I'm such a slob in daily life, I don't know. I noticed that I almost sort of get a sense of sort of butterflies, of nerves going into my practice room to start recording the videos. It's ridiculous, really. But to keep energy and freshness, I mean, if you can perform to someone, even if it's, you know, your flatmate or your cat or someone watching on, you know, maybe on Zoom or something like that, so that you have that sense of it being a performance, that might work. Mm-hmm. I think it's crucial that you don't, I mean, I don't know what exactly you're recording in your studio or at home, but for example, if you're recording something for an entrance to a competition or to for an orchestral audition or something, a taped first round, I think it's very important that you don't make 30 takes of the same piece. Mm-hmm. Because I think by the 30th take, maybe you'll get all the right notes in the right order, but I think the spark will probably have been somewhat reduced. So, you know, I'm not saying that overall you wouldn't maybe want to take the 30 takes, but maybe just give yourself different recording opportunities so that you don't have that huge repetition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Energy. I'm a firm believer in jumping up and down because it also makes you happy.
Yeah. We have another question now from Susanna, who sent this in advance, and she asks, can you tell us more about your project concert of Geraldine Mucha and what inspired you to do this?
Thank you. Geraldine Mucha was a composer I'd never heard of. I knew the name Mucha because when I was studying in Paris, I had a book of Mucha designs and illustrations. He was a Czech illustrator around the turn of the century, but he made his name and fame in Paris making advertisement posters, most famously for Sarah Bernhardt. And so I knew the name Mucha as a painter, as an illustrator, but I'd never come across Geraldine Mucha. And I came into contact with this piece because a British musicologist friend of mine, Peter Davidson, had been to a Mucha exhibition, and he heard a flute and piano piece playing as he was walking around the exhibition, which he couldn't quite place. And being a musicologist, he was just too curious and asked who it was, and it was Geraldine Mucha. And then he wrote to me and said, Emily, who's Geraldine Mucha? And do you know a flute and piano piece by her? And I didn't, but there is a very wonderful website, geraldinemucha.com or something. And there's a list of all her works, amongst which is Nasze Cesta, Our Journey, which she wrote for flute and piano. And so I wrote to the Geraldine Mucha Society and asked them if I might see a copy because I couldn't find a printed version. And they said, no, it's not been printed. And they very kindly sent me a manuscript, which Andrew and I played a few times and fell in love with. And it actually became quite an important key piece in a program that we built around turn of the century Parisian French music and Czech music. And so that gave me an excuse to steal the Janacek violin sonata and play some lovely Enesco and Fauré and all that music from Paris around the time that he was working there. And Mucha had actually befriended Janacek. They knew one another. And Geraldine Mucha was his daughter-in-law. So that was a very nice way of connecting the two worlds. Yeah. And the beautiful, beautiful piece. I asked Stefano Cioffi from I'm just trying to think of the name of the publisher. How embarrassing. Riverberi Sonori. And they published it last year. So now it's accessible to everyone. I think it's a lovely piece. There's and Andrew and I played just before the lockdown. Actually, we did a whole recital in the small hall of the Concertgebouw, and that's all available on YouTube, including the Geraldine Mucha piece. So, but with all we sort of we dressed the part, and there I had some banners made of the illustrations of Mucha, because people. Quite often when I was telling the story, people would say, well, Alphonse Mucha, you say, well, yes, of course, you know the illustrations, but the name doesn't mean anything. But the illustrations, I guarantee anyone who's watching this and thinks, I'm not sure that I know the illustration, I guarantee that when you see Alphonse Mucha illustration, you will recognize it.
Brilliant. Let's have a question now, a live question from Leo. He says, could you speak about your approach to playing scales and facility or technique in general?
Oh, yeah, scales. I used to hate scales, and I didn't quite understand. You know, when I was doing my grade exams, I didn't quite see the point of, you know, learning keys and everything. And now they're absolutely cornerstone of my practice. I've got a kind of theory or philosophy about practicing, and that's that every aspect of your technique, whether that's a particular scale or a particular way of articulating or an ability to play a crescendo on that note, each of these aspects is like a book in a library. And that's why any of you who've seen my videos, the wall behind me is of a bookshelf. And so it's a reminder of that. Each of those books needs to be, need to know where it is, and that it's in good condition, and that it's dust free, and that you can take it whenever you want to be able to. So my theory of practicing is that actually you should only ever need to practice technique, because music is, you can study the score, you can sing it in your head, you can, but you shouldn't need to practice the notes. Now, it is a theory, and practice, of course, we do need to look at the notes, but I'm a firm believer, and I do love practicing scales. In the lockdown, I discovered a book which people have been talking about forever, Reichert, Opus 7. I think it's Opus 7, 7 daily exercises. And just brilliant exercises. I love them. And we all know, I think, the one with the arpeggio and the dominant seventh. So I knew that one, but all the others are wonderful as well. And so I had a lot of fun doing those. So together with scales and those kind of exercise like Reichert, and then some sort of a weekly study. I think that's all great stuff for keeping your fingers in shape and your skills.
Brilliant. We're running out of time a bit, but I was hoping to squeeze in a couple more questions if you've got time, Emily.
I've got time.
We had one sent in advance from Sarah, and she says, as one of the most successful female flute players in the world, what do you think of the gender imbalance in classical music? Has this affected you personally, and how do you think we can move forward?
It's an absolutely brilliant question, and something that has often struck me as being strange, especially in the flute world, is that it's so, at a studying level, it's so dominated by women, and yet profession is maybe nowadays more or less 50-50, but when I was a student, it was absolutely male dominated. I think that for me personally, it's never been an issue. When I joined the orchestra, there were, I think I was one of 6 women in the woodwinds, brass and percussion, but the average of the orchestra was about 50-50. But there just weren't very many in my immediate vicinity. So I've never personally considered it an issue. And I hope other people haven't considered it. I think now things are changing very quickly. Maybe that's not so much to do with not so much in the flute world, but conductors, for example, composers. I think now is a great time to be a female composer or conductor, because there has been such a huge imbalance for so long that's finally being rectified. I think it all stems from the policy making, the politicians network. Look, there is, you know, you get good players and bad players, and you get good female players and good male players, and bad female players and bad male players. We're not talking about that. We're talking about why when there have been such a huge majority of female students, that there are so relatively few in the profession, and that comes down to one thing, and that's the biology, and you know, having to take time off to start a family. And when you look at the countries where the sort of childcare facilities are geared towards equality, looking at Scandinavian countries, for example, where the maternity leave is split between the two parents, so it becomes a very different story from what has traditionally been the case. Then those sort of things, those kind of decisions can only be made by women in positions of power or deciding policy. So I think last week's news in America was a great sign for female politicians, and then hopefully it will filter down to flute players at some point.
We had an interesting talk on one of our live streams recently with Claire Wicks, actually, about racial diversity in orchestras. And I wondered whether you would support the idea of proactively diversifying an orchestra through auditions, or also whether through gender or through race, to proactively change the balance. So removing the screens in order to make sure that you did have, for instance, 50-50 between men and women in principal positions or something like that? Or do you think it's something that has to happen much more gradually and higher up than that?
I think it has to start lower down than that, in that it starts with who is able to learn an instrument, and who is given that opportunity at an early age. I mean, for flute, we're probably talking 8 years old nowadays, 10 years old, something. I was 10 when I started, but those kind of, so I think it starts much earlier on in bringing classical music or learning an instrument, maybe that I should term it more broadly, to giving that opportunity to as many young people as possible, regardless of, you know, how much their understanding there is at home of what learning musical instrument is, or, you know, without any financial barrier. So, you know, all the El Sistema projects around the world, I think have been absolutely superb at redressing the balance, the imbalance rather. And I think that's, for me, that I would rather see changes at that level, really the grassroots, the beginning of learning a musical instrument, making sure that every child, in whatever background, whatever financial situation, that they can get hold of an instrument, that they can have music lessons. I think that's more important than taking down a curtain in order to be able to give an equality to male, female, or you know, whatever racial background someone has. I think it's about opportunities, and unfortunately I think we're going more and more towards a situation where it's only the more privileged that are able to learn a musical instrument, which is just such a missed chance for society.
I think let's have one last question, a live question that we've had asked by a couple of people, actually, once by Sunny and once by Marinella, and they both say, in demonstrating your YouTube videos, you do something with your lips at the end of your note, and I think to taper with a heavenly diminuendo. How do you do this?
Heavenly diminuendo, thank you very much. Well, this, I think, is an excellent moment to plug my next video, which I haven't made yet, but it's brewing in my mind. The next video that I'm going to make is going to be about colors and dynamics. And you might think that's got nothing to do with it, but I think that a lot of players play in a sort of safe, let's say, mezzo forte range, and don't dare to get too loud because they might get too sharp, or they don't dare to get too soft because they'll get too flat. So actually incorporated in that video is going to be something about playing in tune at the extremes of dynamic. When we're playing a diminuendo on a note as a flute player, if we don't take care, the pitch is going to drop. So what we need to do is think of lifting the airstream by using this action to, if I'm blowing the middle of the note, the mezzo forte is here, and then as I go to piano and pianissimo, I think of the airstream as doing that to compensate that natural thing that will happen if without compensation of the note collapsing and getting soggy and flat. And yeah, what was the question? How to give any tips? So one of my favorite exercises, which is the most boring exercise, so which is just playing long notes with a long diminuendo and a long crescendo with a tuning machine. And that's never going to make it into anyone's flute exercise book, but it's absolutely crucial for being able to control your pitch and quality of sound. So quality of sound, coming back to all the whistle tones and harmonics, you'll learn to feel more comfortable playing at softer dynamics, with the right air speed, and then using your lips or the jaw actually just to control the pitch at the end of the diminuendo. So
brilliant.
The next video.
We will look out for that. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in all of the questions. I'm not sure we've managed to get through quite all of them, but I think we've covered most topics as much as possible. And thank you, Emily, so much for your time and for all of your advice for all of the players watching.
Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this wonderful series. I think you're doing a great job. I've seen some of your other films and you're doing an absolutely marvellous job, Camilla. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's watching. We'll see you soon.
Bye.